Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Shelby, and I have a really cool experience, and I get to share it with my favorite theorist.
Hey everybody, it's me, Stuart Hall. A little bit about myself. I was born February 3rd, 1932, in Kingston, colony of Jamaica. I studied at Merton College, Oxford, and I died, if I was having to predict how I died February 10th, 2014, of kidney failure at the age of 82 in London, England.
I wouldn't count on that.
Yeah, chances are slim.
Chances are slim. What are some of the things you're known for, though?
So I was a founder of New Left Review, articulation, encoding and decoding, which we'll get more into further on into the interview, model of communication, as well as reception theory.
Cool. So, what fields were you in?
So I focus on the field of cultural studies and sociology.
So, for that, who were your biggest influences?
So some of my biggest influences would be Karl Marx, Roland Barthes, who's absolutely one of my favorites, Antonio Gramsci, Raymond Williams, Richard Hogarth, and Louis Althusser. Although I was also a critic of Althusser myself.
Huh. Yeah, I can see that, but mighty big of you to appreciate some of them, but then also have some issues with some of their things. You don't have to agree with everybody.
Yeah.
Gee, I think we could use a little bit more of that. Could you tell me a little bit more about your background, though?
Yeah, so as I had previously mentioned, I was born in Jamaica into a middle-class Jamaican family. My family was African, British, Portuguese, Jewish, and Indian descent. I would describe myself as a bright, promising scholar.
I can definitely see that. I get why you'd say that. Okay, so but what were some of your most notable theories, though?
Some of my most notable theories? Alright, yeah. So my encoding and decoding model philosophy, cultural identity and the African diaspora, my reception theory, and minimal cells was an excerpt out of a book I wrote. So, as I had mentioned, I was a Jamaican-born theorist who was a prominent British cultural theorist, as well as a political activist. I would explain minimal self by stating that you are as much what you are as what you aren't, which helped immigrants like myself feel that they were part of the place that is not actually their own. An example of that is when myself, a Jamaican-born, went to England to study at Oxford and no longer identified as a Jamaican.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. But if we just narrow that down, what will you be focused on in this interview?
So today what I'd like to focus on would be encoding and decoding.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about your theory of encoding and decoding?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first publication in 1973, titled Encoding and Decoding, in the television discourse, is where I first presented my thoughts on the theory. It actually took me 7 years to republish on the matter, so in 1980, I published Encoding and Decoding, which was featured in Culture, Media, and Language. Many consider me to be one of the biggest influential people when it regards cultural studies. My 1973 work is considered to be a big change in my research on structuralism. Some say I like to have a semiotic approach to things. I believe that there is a structure, that signs are correlated and have a meaning. I believe that there are 4 codes of the encoding-decoding model of communication. The dominant code, also known as the hegemonic code. What I mean by this is that this is the message that the encoder expects us, the decoder, to identify and interpret the meaning. The second way of encoding is the professional code. Now, this code works hand in hand with the aforementioned dominant code. Professional code is used to give the message sent quality and values, giving it a professional-like feel, something that would have quality work for television. The third would be the negotiated code. Negotiated code is acknowledging the truth of the dominant message while still sticking to its own rule set and having forms of opposition to the dominant code. The fourth code is the oppositional code. Oppositional code is when someone receives a message, but their social position on the message puts them in an oppositional stance regarding the code they initially received. In a more simpler term, they reject the message they are receiving because they oppose to it. An example of oppositional code would be if someone loves fashion and they have a certain fashion magazine that they would recommend to me, my oppositional code reaction would be, look, I'm not interested in the magazine because I have no interest in fashion. Therefore, I dislike the magazine and I am rejecting the message. Now, companies are accumulating information on us through internet, browser history, etc., and using that information to send more educated media to us. They already know what we have an interest in, which therefore eliminates media message that we have an oppositional code against.
Wow, I'm actually a huge fan of that oppositional code. It might be my favorite. But real quick, how would you say mass media uses advertising to tell the consumer a story?
So, hey, my name's Nick Marano. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Stuart. Advertising is everywhere all the time. Culture is a place dominated by advertising, which is the main storyteller. Essentially, to not be influenced by advertising would be to not have culture. The evolution of capitalism, one which is influenced by advertising, one which is characterized by corporations exercising monopolistic power and sustaining demand by advertising through the media. And this means more consuming requires more production. Now, commercial culture is overwhelming because everything around us, every place we go, there's commercialization. There's commercialization in sports, TV, schools, newspapers, the internet, our phones, billboards, on our street corners. There's literally advertising everywhere. And advertising has literally colonized culture. Advertising basically tells us that commodities will bring us happiness. Each advertisement contains an encoded message that we as the consumer must decode. The decoding of the message may have an implied message, but there's also other factors that come into play, such as socioeconomical situations.
So what would you say your reflection on Stuart Hall, culture as well as identity?
So, just some reflections on Stuart Hall, culture as well as identity. Culture gives us a chance to be whoever we want to be. Through media, we learn as much as we do elsewhere, if not more. I came to an understanding that he had felt he had a different identity, which he could evolve through leaving Jamaica and going to England to study at Oxford. This was the first time that Stuart Hall had felt the connection that he'd been looking for. At this moment, he could be whoever he wanted to be. He could build the foundation of his own core values, beliefs, and principles. It kind of reminds me of an old saying I would hear from now and then, fake it until you make it. Basically, become who you want to be. Whether you wear different clothes, hang out with different people, this was the time Stuart Hall could build on his newfound culture. This was a place where he could now grow, a land of opportunity, and you can now start building your life. Replace poverty with richness if that was something you aspired to do. If culture is defining who you are, then you can be whoever you want to be, and not each class is defined in such stereotypical ways. So, a quote, according to Stuart Hall, about identity. Now, I've shared a little bit about identity and kind of how he looks at it. So, here's a quote on it. Identity is a structured representation which only achieves its positive through the narrow eye of the negative. Talk about deep, right?
Amen.
Yeah. Identity is the feeling that you belong to a group. Identity is related to ethnicity, religion, generation, social class, as well as any group that has its own distinct culture. An example of identity would be a person's traditional characteristics, although in current times, identity is more fluid than one might imagine. Personally, an example of this, somebody struggling with identity, somebody, lost an identity. I actually had the chance to have her as a teacher at Eastern, was Rachel Dolezal. Yeah, so she identifies as a black woman, which goes strongly against her upbringing as a white female with red hair. But I mean, some people feel they identify a different way, identify with a different culture, a different different group of people. You can identify, nowadays you can identify to be whoever, whatever you want to be. So, who am I to judge if somebody truly feels that that's who they are? So, I just think that's very interesting. And, I just found a lot of the readings that Stuart, that I read about Stuart Hall just be very interesting. And, that's about all I have today. Once again, my name is Nicholas Marano. I'm a senior at Eastern Washington University. And yeah, my major is communication studies, minor in psych, and that was my presentation. Thank you everybody for watching the video, and have a great rest of your days or nights. Bye.